Welcome to the Winnie Podcast. This show is focused on empowering ranchers. Whether you're a seasoned rancher or just getting started, we'll guide you on how to use the infinite banking concept as an alternative way to finance your operations. It's a better way to think about money. Join us as we discuss planning for the future, attracting the next generation, and the art of keeping more money within the family. Here's your hosts, Winnie and Lacey.
Hey, welcome in. We have a special guest from Saskatchewan, Alberta. I was going to say Saskatchewan, Canada.
We're part of Alberta now. Saskatchewan's part of Alberta now. You never know who you're part of anymore.
Oh, man. Okay. You know, you haven't had coffee yet when you start mixing up your provinces.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yes. Chris Thompson, thank you so much for joining us today. Chris is with Equitable Life of Canada, but this is sort of where he stopped at the moment. I mean, man, you've been in the business, in the financial industry for over 40 plus years, specifically around life insurance and all sorts in the financial industry. I know that you've worked a number of roles, including having been a financial advisor yourself at one point, but now you're definitely a trainer and independent financial advisors, and, you know, especially for the bigger cases. And yeah, so you're an advanced case consultant is your exact title with Equitable Life of Canada. And over the course of your 40 plus year career, you've had many clients that are advisors, but also many clients that are also farmers. In fact, yourself, you are a fifth generation on the farm as well.
We're just going into our sixth generation on the farm now. So that next generation is just coming up now, yeah?
Oh my goodness, right? So a lot of, especially people in the city, we don't necessarily always understand how hard it is to keep the farm or something in the family for that many generations to come. Right? And so today is all about, the reason why you're here today is because you're going to help us understand a lot more about the role of trusts. And, really the topic and even the title of today's session is like to trust or not to trust, because there's so much mixed information. And I think there's a double-edged sword. Social media offers such vast amount of knowledge and sound bites, and it can really arouse a lot of curiosity. And one of the things that has really popped up here in Canada is the use of trusts, especially when you got people like down in the States who are talking about things like Vortex banking, right? Which is completely American, but it plants that seed of curiosity for Canadians thinking, okay, is this something that we can do here? Because it sounds so amazing of what it can do down there, right? So you're really here to help lend us, your experience, your expertise around just demystifying what we can do here in Canada, and really just, help begin the process for Canadians of okay, what is a good situation? What is not a good situation to start a trust, right? So these are just some of the things that we're going to cover off on today.
Okay.
Yeah. So I know I had you just play a little blip of Vortex banking. And what were some of your first thoughts about the concept of Vortex banking?
Yeah, in that very short video, Winnie, and it's an American video. So I think that's one thing people really have to be careful of is what's the source of the information? And because the American environment from a tax point of view and a product point of view and concept point of view, it's a very, very different environment. So what appears to be almost a too good to be true is probably not produced in Canada, because that video, from what I could see, it was very, very brief, but it made it sound like you set this trust up. It's something called a spendthrift trust. But we don't have anything that's sort of ordered that way. But a spendthrift trust is to set up a trust for the benefit of a person who can't manage their own money. So you put your business inside the spendthrift trust. The business generates income. That some of that income would be used to buy a life insurance contract. The trust would borrow against that life insurance contract and invest back into the business. And the video made it sound like there was no tax at all here. And So when you watch that video, and I can understand when Canadians watch that and say, boy, that sounds like a great deal. Like anytime you can structure something to not pay tax, then that sounds like a good deal. But anything that makes it sound like there's no tax to be paid, or there's a tax dodge or a tax avoidance, or certainly tax evasion, be very, very skeptical of that, because there is no free lunch here in Canada. The government finds a way to have tax paid on income, whether it's generated inside a trust, inside a business, or personally, or elsewhere. Tax has to be paid. Now we can defer tax. Trusts are commonly used in Canada as a tax deferral tool, but tax one day is ultimately going to have to be paid.
Yeah, to my understanding, that was also my understanding too, Chris, is that any tax benefits that once existed in trusts are really no longer. And the benefit of a trust here in Canada is mainly just more control and like being able to control, I guess they keep using the terms control beyond the grave.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's two types of trusts. There's a trust called an vivos trust, which is a trust you set up while you're alive for various reasons. And then there's the testamentary trust, which is what most people would think of as a trust that comes into existence after you pass away. But all trusts, with the exception of a couple of examples, are taxed at the top marginal rate in your province. So, for example, Alberta's 47.5 or 48%. Saskatchewan's 47.5. So if $1 is earned inside that trust, it's taxed right from $1 at the top marginal rate. And when you're taxed as an individual, as you know, you have graduated rates. So you can earn a certain amount of income and pay no tax, but you don't hit your top marginal rate until you're over a couple $100,000. But a trust is not taxed that way. So you can see what the government is doing is that they don't want to create a structure that allows a much lower tax rate and then a personal tax rate, because there's going to be a huge incentive to do that. Now, a private company can do that. A private company, if it's earning active income, only pays tax at 11% on the first $500,000 of income. And then the tax in Alberta, 23% on income above that. So that's a heck of a lot less than 48%. But by the time you get that income out of the company, you're right back to 48%. So you always come right back to 48. So a trust is a wonderful deferral tool, as is a private company. A private company is a wonderful deferral tool because there's no tax personally until you actually pull it out of the company.
Right. And so is there anything in terms of characteristics of it's hard to say because we're not in the States, and it's not like you've studied what a spendthrift trust is. So to the best of, our ability, we can only kind of go by what is said on the internet of like what's being advertised as like what's so amazing about it. Would you say that although there is no tax benefits, the discretionary trust here in Canada, is that also like the inter vivos trust that you were talking about? Are those the same thing, discretionary trust and inter vivos?
Yeah, a fully discretionary trust. A trust is an entity that holds assets. And so you have three groups here. You have the settler of the trust, so the person who creates it and settles that trust with property. You have the trustee, who is the legal owner of that property now. So the assets aren't actually in the trust. The trustee is the legal owner of those assets. And then you have the beneficiaries. The beneficiaries are the beneficial owners of those assets. So if a trust earns income for the benefit of the beneficiaries, so long as the income attribution rules don't apply, you can generate income inside a trust and transfer that income out to a trust beneficiary and have a tax in their names. And then the trust deducts that income from their tax return, because the trust files a tax return as well, which is called a T3. So an individual files a T1, a corporation files a T2, and a trust has a T3. But even then, you have to be careful that if you're distributing income through beneficiaries, that the income attribution rules don't apply, which bring that income back into the settler of the trust. But I guess when you get back to that Vortex trust, when you're talking about this Vortex trust, from what I see in the video, that can't be done in Canada based on what little information the video provided. And it's funny, just before you and I connected on this podcast, I had a call with a couple of accountants, and we were talking about trusts and where trusts are used. And I told them I was going to be doing this podcast with you, and I talked about this idea of a Vortex trust and my understanding of what this trust was. And they just started to laugh. They said that can't be done here.
Well, this is just like the tip of the iceberg here, because I do intend on gathering more information. Because it's interesting, Chris, like, and I'm sure you find it interesting too. Like, I mean, in order to really have a complete picture on if this is something a person should do, right? Every person is so different. Everyone has like they're in a different season of their life depending on where you are. I mean, you do have to get an opinion of an accountant and a lawyer that actually understand anything about this, number one, right? I mean, not every accountant understands trust completely. I mean, not even every accountant that I've come to understands even permanent whole life insurance, never mind trusts.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's the same thing, even for a lawyer. Like everyone in those, like, and even in our profession, we have our areas of specialization. So you really have to really take your time if you're going to do something like this, because like you said, this is a whole other layer of administration and that you need to add to take care of, because it's not something you can just start frivolously and then end frivolously, I don't think, because, it has, to the best of my understanding, just through some of the things that you were talking about, it's like every 21 years, right?
And that's where I most often see trust used, just in my practice, my everyday work, is that trust is often used in combination with a freeze, an estate freeze. So what we do is, and this is in a context of a business owner, a family that owns a business. So we have generation one who started the business, or maybe even inherited from a previous generation, but we have generation one running the business that has substantial value. We freeze the value of the business because as that business is growing, that just adds more tax liability as that business is growing. So the idea is, let's freeze the value of the business today at whatever that value is, and let's put the future growth of that business in the next generation's hands without giving them actual equity in the business. So what you do is you freeze the value of the business, you put the growth shares, the common shares in the trust. That trust, the common shares would have a zero cost base, zero fair market value, but all the future growth from that on those shares would be, or in the business, be in those shares. But mom and dad shares are fixed value preferred shares, so they take back fixed value preferred shares. Now their tax liability on those preferred shares is locked in. So we know that mom and dad, generation one's tax liability is not going to grow anymore because it's locked. And the future tax liability is going to be on the second generation. It's kind of wash, rinse, repeat. We lock it up for generation one. We transfer the value on to generation two. One day we'll lock it up for generation two, pass it on to generation three. And you could, in theory, indefinitely do that, transfer that liability forward. So the nice thing about the trust is that when you do that freeze, you could give the next generation those common shares or those growth shares directly. There's all kinds of reasons why you might not want to. The kids might be minors. The kids may not be married yet. So you're concerned about who they might marry and what the circumstances might be, concerned about creditor issues for those kids. So you want to keep those shares out of the ownership of the kids that will ultimately get them. But we have 21 years from the establishment of that trust to move those shares out to the trust beneficiaries, and it's fully discretionary. So let's say I see trust set up where all the kids are trust beneficiaries, all the grandkids are trust beneficiaries, everybody in the family is a trust beneficiary. But we can decide by the 21st year which one of those beneficiaries receives shares and which ones we don't. And when we do that, we can roll those shares out at original cost to those beneficiaries without any tax hit or without any tax consequences. So now they own those shares. So let's say we started those shares, had zero cost base, zero fair market value. By the time we roll those shares out, they're worth $100 a share. The cost base is $100. We can roll it out at zero cost base. So now the kids own $100 of share value per share. So by that stage, though, hopefully in 21 years, we'll have confidence in their financial ability, their business ability, their personal circumstances, their marriages are solid. So there won't be any danger to the company of a failed marriage. And of course, you're never out of the woods on that, but at least it buys us some time. So it's a wonderful tool from that perspective.
Yeah. So let me unpack this a little bit. And it's interesting, Chris, because in most things, there's always a way to speed up, like speed up what you're listening to. And in this case, folks, just as a warning, Chris thinks fast, and unfortunately, you might just have to replay what Chris says because there's not a slow down button for Chris.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I can't help that.
No, you shouldn't. I mean, I love your spirit when it comes to this. I think, so estate freezes.
Mm-hmm.
In order to freeze an estate, you have to be incorporated, right?
Yeah,
This
not
doesn't happen
necessarily.
if you're a sole No? Okay, so
No.
this can actually apply to people who are sole proprietors is what I want to know, because
Yeah.
when you're talking about common shares and all that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
that directly is related to having a corporation. So I
Yeah.
just want to know, because there's tons of people out there who are not incorporated and they're just sole proprietors. So
Yeah.
how do trusts work for
Yeah,
sole
what
proprietors?
you do, you're right. You have to have a corporation, but that doesn't mean you need a corporation today. So what you can do, let's say you're a sole proprietor. What you can do is you can freeze the value of your business assets today as a sole proprietor by transferring those into a brand new company and then freezing them. So what you do is you take back a note back as a shareholder, because you're giving those assets, you're transferring those assets into a brand new company of which you're a shareholder in, and you paid for those assets personally. So now the company owes you a tax-free note to repay you for the cost base of those assets. And then you take back preferred shares for the difference between fair market value and cost base. So now you own the preferred shares. The company owes you some money based on cost base. And then the common shares, the new growth shares, can be in the family trust. Or your kids can own those common shares. Or even you might own those common shares, but it kind of defeats the purpose of the freeze if you own the preferred shares and the common shares. So generally, you put the common shares in a trust. So as you see, trust is a wonderful tool when it comes to continuing to protect the assets, buying time to figure out who should get those assets, making sure that those assets aren't vulnerable to attack by a creditor or an exiting spouse or bad habits of the next generation taking over the asset. It protects the asset. It's a wonderful tool from that perspective. There's no magic bullet here. It doesn't do anything magical, but it defers everything.
What about privacy? To my understanding, it's that, especially when it comes to when a will goes through a probate, it's public.
Yep.
And to my understanding, a trust can be made private so that not anyone publicly will know what's happening in the trust. Is that true?
Yeah, a trust is automatically private. You don't have to make it private, and a trust is not a public document. So, as you've said, you could find out what anybody's will says. That's a public document. So if you wanted to find out what in your family or outside of your family, if you want to know what their will says, all you have to do is request it from the provincial court. A trust is not a public document. It is a private document. So when somebody wants that privacy about a certain asset or what they're doing with certain assets, certainly a trust is very, very useful.
As I'm hearing all of this, part of the consideration is especially like, as you well know, most people don't have their wills done even to begin with. And it's just one of the most difficult documents just to even get the first version out, let alone iteration upon iteration. And so I think, to trust or not to trust, I think one of the key considerations here is that if you love all the benefits of it, you must also commit to all the things to make it the most advantageous, like manage it, like simply make sure you manage it. And also communication comes to mind, like moving it from one generation to the next generation. It just requires like having actual forthright conversations with your family about how it works, what you expect from it. And so that when it comes to 21 years, like 21 years kind of sounds like a long time, but I don't know, the older I also get, I also feel like it goes by so fast. And so, and like a lot of crucial conversations can be had along the way in order to make having the trust, be successful from one generation to another. And you pretty much like whoever starts the trust really has to become the leader in having those courageous conversations about what it's for, what it can do, and how it works. And it needs to be done often because let's just face it, like we don't unless you're talking about it often, we forget. Like we forget what it can be used for and how it works.
And it always, whether it's will, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, all of those legal documents, it all comes down to what is the family trying to accomplish? What's important to the family? What's the end goal? And how do we use the various tools, whether it be wills, trusts, life insurance, corporate structure? How do we use those various tools to help us get what it is we're trying to do? And the one thing with the trust people have to remember is that when a trust owns the assets, you don't own those anymore. You don't legally own those. So you have to think about control too. So how do you structure this thing so you maintain control of the company now? Because part of the shares of the company are no longer are no longer owned by you. Now, you might be a beneficiary of the trust. Sometimes what you see happen is by the time the 21st year comes along, the generation one has decided for whatever reason, they don't want to roll those shares out to their kids or grandkids. So roll those shares back. What they'll do is they'll take those shares back themselves and then do another freeze. So now they have two sets of shares. They got the preferred shares they set up 21 years ago. Now these new preferred shares, and then set up another trust with growth shares. So why would you ever do that? It just means you got to the 21st year, but you're still not confident that you should be rolling those growth shares into the hands of an individual, because we have to do that. Otherwise, if we don't do that, those shares are taxed within the trust. So let's say those shares grew from zero value to $100 in value. If you don't get those shares out, roll those shares out, there's a $100 capital gain, half of which is taxable in the trust. And we don't have any money because we're
and to solve that issue for potential taxable events, I believe this is also where life insurance, permanent life insurance, can also be advantageous. Is that?
Yep.
That's my assumption.
Yeah. What you can do, again, you can, one of the trusts that's commonly used is something called a qualified spousal trust. So let's say I can roll my assets, capital assets, into a trust of which my wife is the sole beneficiary. And so when I die, if I predecease her, there's no tax on those assets. So nothing happens. No tax on my terminal return other than the income I earned in the year that I died. But I'm not deemed to dispose of any assets because I just rolled everything over to her. With a farm, you can roll things over your kids and grandkids, the same sort of thing. But they have to be qualified farm assets. But now the tax happens when she dies. So when she dies, you have a deemed disposition of those assets in the trust. So now that the question is, what is the nature of those assets and how do we pay the tax? And that's where insurance is often used, is to create that instant liquidity to make sure we have enough cash there to file that terminal tax return so we don't have to start selling assets, whether they're personally owned or in a trust or what have you.
So in your 40 plus years experience, what are the what do you think the ratio has really been in people getting permanent life insurance and using trusts?
When you say permanent life insurance and people using trusts, there's two ways you can look at that. One is a trust owning permanent life insurance. So the trust would own it, pay for it, be the beneficiary. And then when individuals that are insured in that trust, the benefits paid into the trust, and then the proceeds are paid out to the trust beneficiaries. So I don't see a lot of that. And it's not because it's not a good idea. I just don't think a lot of people are aware of that. And depending on what you're wanting to do in terms of the distribution of your wealth and the control of that distribution of your wealth, that should be something that is up for discussion. You've heard me talk about the Rockefeller, J.D. Rockefeller, and how they made their billions in the oil business in the U.S. And of all the very, very wealthy people from the U.S. history, they're one of the few families from the 1800s that still have any money left. The people like the Vanderbilts and the Astors and so on are broke, and they just lost their money or spent it all. Where Rockefeller, the family still has a lot of wealth left, $10 billion of wealth. But they're using a family trust to manage that. And everybody in that family apparently gets insured. And so it's perpetual growth in value inside that trust because people are insured, people die, people are born. So you have that rotation of people through the family that keeps that trust fully funded. And then the trust beneficiaries benefit from that planning. So whoever gave old John D that idea was a brilliant idea. That trust has been in place for many, many years. But it's a way of perpetuating wealth. That's the question is, how do you, when a family is fortunate enough to generate and create a significant amount of wealth, and it doesn't even have to be that significant, but how do you make sure you hang on to it? And how do you pass it on in a responsible way? Especially when it's a family business. When it's a family business, you need to know your family members, some of them at least, have a capacity to carry that on and continue that family legacy. If it's just cash or investments or real estate, how do we make sure that we pass that on in a responsible and cost-effective, tax-effective way? And the thing that wealthy families do very, very well, wealthy people do very, very well, is defer tax. You buy an asset that grows in value, but you don't pay any tax on that growth. But in Canada, the exception of qualified farm shares or fishing shares, you hit the wall on the decease of the second spouse. So that's where we have to figure out, okay, where does the cash come to pay the tax on that? So we can keep that wealth together for the benefit of the next generation. So you're right, it's not just insurance, it's not just accounting, it's not just wills and trusts, it's everything being used in sync to make sure we're accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish.
Indeed, indeed. Like, yeah, it is, and it's not just solved in like one conversation. It definitely happens over many conversations just to get the entire picture and really to figure out, like what is it that you're really wanting to accomplish, right? And so coming back around to that question, it's like if a person, again, if you're wanting to achieve, for lack of better words, because I'm gapping on the words right now, but repetitive intergenerational wealth,
Yeah.
right? If we want to keep the money for generations to come and coming, because I really want to tie it in here because, of course, people who are listening to this are existing people who are implementing the infinite banking concept, who use the, permanent life insurance to execute, that mindset, right? And then there's also people really looking at, okay, do I want to do infinite banking even, right? And so they're still in that very investigative stage and really wanting to just figure out like, where does all these pieces, how can I fit all these pieces so that I have like a full picture? And so unpacking all of that really does take time. And the lovely thing is that an offer to anyone listening here, and if you're really wanting to, if you're really wanting help with solving things, really booking some time with myself or my team. And depending on how advanced it is, that's where Chris can really come in and help with all of that as well. I would also just maybe, let's see, I just want to make sure I'm just going to peruse my notes here because I keep thinking about like how like term insurance is really great for a certain term, like for a certain period. Yeah. But when we're doing advanced estate planning, like whether we're doing trusts or not, I think permanent insurance, from what I've really gleaned from the last 15 years, it really does solve a lot of advanced estate planning issues. And the sooner that you can really get that in place for yourself, the much more cost effective it's going to be, as well, right? And I just wanted your opinion, Chris, on where you feel like, have you seen in your career, like where term insurance was just used and a person never got permanent insurance and where it may have like bit them in the butt, I guess?
Yeah. Again, when it comes to permanent insurance and temporary insurance, they're both insurance products. So whether you have $1 million of permanent insurance or $1 million of term insurance, it's the same $1 million. The thing with $1 million of term insurance, in order to collect on that, you got to die at the right time. And because term insurance, as most people listening to this will know, is that the premium goes up over time and the insurance company takes it away from you when you're older. It cancels before. Term insurance is designed to die before you do. That's the way it's designed. Permanent insurance, you can't outlive permanent insurance. So when it comes to tax planning, wealth transition, business transition, we need liquidity in the estate. We need liquidity somewhere. So it's not like permanent insurance, you have to buy permanent insurance. You have to think about it in this way. Do we have a cash need at some point on death? And it's often a tax reason or an estate equalization reason to non-business kids, or there's a buy-sell agreement that obligates us to buy back shares. We have a cash need. So the question is, where does that cash come from? And then insurance is one way to generate that cash. So then you'd evaluate that insurance solution against the other ways of generating cash. And it happens to be a very, very inexpensive way to do it, especially when you do it inside your company. You can buy it inside your company. The company gets the insurance benefit. The company gets this thing called a capital dividend credit, which allows us to get that money out or buy those shares back tax-free. And no other asset does that. So it certainly is worthy of consideration. I should say, Winnie, as well, the great thing about term life insurance is that anybody listening to this, if you have term life insurance, congratulations, good for you. You probably protect debt to protect your family, which is exactly what it's intended for. But that contract should have an option on it called convertibility. So it's called renewable and convertible. It means you can renew it when the premium goes up without question. The insurance company can't take it away from you, but you can convert it to a permanent contract without questions asked. So no ongoing medical questionnaire or lifestyle questionnaire. And that's hugely valuable because when you bought the term life insurance, you probably bought it for a short-term need, boundary protection, debt protection. But now you're looking at estate planning and wealth transition. Your need for the insurance or the use of the insurance is a totally different need. I mean, I need a totally different type of insurance to do that. But what if you have a health history where you can't get it? Or you've got a habit or a hobby where you can't get it? So now we can convert that term insurance to a permanent contract without having to show the insurance company that you're still healthy or insurable. That's the huge power of a term life insurance contract. is that when you buy that thing, you've just locked in that ability to convert that to a permanent contract without having to go through all the hoops again.
And medical is a big one. I mean, no one, well, maybe a special few, but very special few have a crystal ball on their health, but you just never know. Like, and again, like you said, it could be lifestyle or a hobby that you end up picking up that makes it so that if you tried to even get life insurance today, you'd be declined.
Yeah.
And so that term is amazing for that. I would also like, I guess, just to give some context here too, making sure that you do have insurance as one of the things that you have right till, you graduate to heaven it is an amazing thing to have, because then the people that you're leaving behind don't have to rush or get put into a position where they are motivated sellers to solve like a taxation issue of any kind or a creditor issue of any kind, especially if there's any debt left behind. And I think people don't often think about that, especially if, you're really of the camp of like, I'm just going to buy term and I'm going to invest, right? Because I'm just thinking about how I'm going to live out the rest of my days and make sure I have income at the rest of my life, but then not really think about, okay, well, how does that impact who you're leaving behind when you have a bunch of investments and then a huge tax bill that you're going to leave behind? Like, they are going to literally have to like sell something in order to pay things out, period. Unless there's other things, like unless there's certain circumstances that you can see that might not apply.
Well, how do you, that's saying when you die, again, with the exception of farm shares and fishing shares, so long as they're qualified or farm property, you're deemed to dispose of that property at fair market value when you pass away. If you have a spouse, you can roll that to your spouse tax-free, but then he or she, when she does, they're deemed to dispose of it. So you can't get around that tax liability. So whatever the value of that asset is, minus the cost of that asset, that's a capital gain, half of which is taxable. So that's a great thing about an estate freeze. We talk about a freeze. The freeze, the goalposts don't move for us anymore. We know exactly what that liability is, and it makes it much easier to plan for the liquidity solution because it's not moving. If we don't do the freeze, then the goalposts are constantly moving. We don't know. It's like trying to shoot a duck. You're trying to lead before the duck. Say, okay, where's that duck going to be when the shot gets there? And it's much, much harder to do it. So again, the insurance is just as a liquidity solution, Winnie. It's not a be-all, end-all, but in terms of generating cash, it's pretty tough to beat because I can take a buck and create much more than $1 in terms of ultimate value, and it's all tax-free, especially whether I own it personally or corporately. But if I own it corporately, my company pays for it with a lot less lower tax dollars, and my company can get that out tax-free as well, the way the tax system works. So it's pretty tough to do that because if I had a tax liability and I owned a company with a bunch of real estate in it, I could say, well, I'm just going to start selling buildings or have my family sell a bunch of buildings inside the company to pay that tax liability. Well, the assets are in the company. The liability is in my estate, totally different place. So now I'm going to start selling buildings in the company. I pay tax inside the company in that disposition or that sale inside the company. Then you have tax there. Then to get it out of the company, we have to pay it out as a taxable dividend to the estate. By the time you get it out of the estate, the value of your asset is worth about half of what it would have been before you sold it. So it's just a very, very expensive way. So that's why I always encourage people, even the accountants I talked to today before this call, was they take the conversation up to the point, okay, we've done the tax plan. Here's what the liability is. And they'll say, Chris, often the client says to me, okay, we've done our job. Kids will figure it out from here. So you can't really stop there. You have to say, okay, you've done your job. You've done the freeze. You've done the restructure. How much cash are we going to need now when you die? And give the kids instructions as to where that's going to come from. I'm not saying you have to buy life insurance. If you do, that's a cheap way to do it. But if you don't do it, give them some instruction as to where it's going to come from. I just think it's irresponsible to say, hey, it's out of my hands now. It's somebody else's problem.
Yes. Well, and there's definitely people who do have that opinion for sure. And yeah, I agree with you. It's not the best way to leave things. That's for sure. So just a bit of a recap here. Vortex banking, although it sounds so intriguing and it sounds so good. And I guess if it's something that you want to do, you're probably just going to have to move down to the States if you want to do that.
Yeah, well,
and
like
become
anything,
a citizen there.
Just consider the source. When you're watching these videos, it's great to educate yourself and watch all this stuff, but consider where it's coming from. And especially when it comes to financial concepts, when they're produced in the States or anywhere else in the world outside of Canada, that's a totally different tax jurisdiction. So what they say they can do there does not translate into what we can do here at all.
Yeah, because we don't have the same flexibility that they're talking about, with their like this, what they are describing the spendthrift trust to be. And CRA doesn't sound like they meet those same requirements. I think there could even be legal consequences for trying to use structures outside that are intended or approved for that purpose. So it's not compliant with CRA. You could end up paying unnecessary legal fees, and you could be actually risking penalties for, aggressive tax structuring to try to like fit a square peg into a round hole kind of thing, right? So
but it's a non-conversation. When it comes to the States, they can do what they can do in there. And even this video you sent to me, I can't understand how they'd even do that in the States. There's got to be more of that story that is not told in that video. And again, but the intent of most of those videos is to tell you enough to get your attention and get you intrigued and get you wanting to talk to somebody. They don't tell the whole story. And so I got to think there's more to that story because it's just way too good to be true. And we can definitely not do it here.
Yeah. So again, Chris and I are not a lawyer, and we're not accountants. And I myself am a licensed life insurance advisor, and I'm also an authorized infinite banking practitioner here in Canada. So we both work with Canadians who want to understand the real, compliant, and powerful ways to, protect your assets, use trust strategically, and implement the infinite banking with confidence. And so that's what I do. Chris he lends support from the advanced case consultant side of things. And so once again, we're truly honored to bring you some more information and hopefully demystify some of the stuff that you guys have been hearing down in the States. Yeah. So Chris, thank you again for sharing your time with us.
My pleasure, Winnie. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast, and look forward to seeing you again and talking to you again soon. Take care.
So glad you leaned in with us on the Winnie podcast. We truly hope you're feeling more informed and empowered to take another step towards optimizing your financial life. Right now, make sure you hit subscribe so you can keep growing and learning with us. Until next time, we wish you prosperity in every area of your life.